a very warm welcome to everyone. Welcome to all of you to our webinar. This webinar is organized by the ANU Indonesia Institute. We are hosting this discussion on women's rights and gender equality in Indonesia to mark International Human Rights Day, which will be celebrated worldwide tomorrow on Friday, the 10th of December. My name is Eva Nisa from the ANU Indonesia Institute and School of Culture, History and Language, the ANU. I'll be chairing this webinar this afternoon. Please allow me to begin by acknowledging and celebrating the traditional owners of the diverse lands on which we meet, which for those of us here in Canberra is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. Thank you again to the ANU Indonesia Institute and College of Asia and the Pacific for supporting this initiative. Let me say very briefly about this panel. This panel focuses on learning from this stellar panel of powerful Indonesian women to help us understand the issues of gender equality and inequality in contemporary Indonesia. We'd like to invite them to examine the extent to which Indonesian women have achieved equality in a broad array of political, economic, and social fields, and what Indonesian women are doing today to overcome some of the obstacles that lie in the path of gender equality. So today we are joined by 5 wonderful panelists, the experts in the study of women's rights and gender equality in Indonesia. They will be leading us to understand the issues based on the topics of their current research and also projects. Each of the speakers will present their work on women's rights and gender equality for about 10 minutes. And this then will be followed by the Q&A session. Just to note of housekeeping, as you could see from the, have we put it on the chat box? Yes, as you could see from the chat box text, please mute your microphones. I see they're all on mute now. You're welcome to keep your camera on. It'll be lovely to see your faces. And the chat box is open for comments, discussion, and questions to the panel. For the Q&A session, please use the raise hand button on Zoom, and I will call on you to unmute yourself. You can also place or type your question for the panel into the chat, and I will read it aloud on your behalf. There is a survey after this webinar. It will be wonderful to hear your suggestions for our upcoming events. Lastly, we are recording the session, this panel discussion, and also the Q&A session for future viewing, so please be aware of that. So before we get started, I'd like to invite Professor Edward Aspinall from ANU Indonesia Institute to welcome you all to this webinar. Professor Edward Aspinall, over to you.
Thank you, Eva, and I won't speak for long. I just wanted to express how delighted I am that we're able to host this really important event today. The ANU Indonesia Institute, for those of you who don't know about our organization, the ANU has a very diverse body of staff and research students who focus on Indonesia, but scattered across many different disciplines. So as well as sort of the major disciplines of political science, anthropology, economics, and so on, right across the university, we have people working on Indonesia in very diverse fields. So the ANU Indonesia Institute is aim to sort of bring together this diverse body of people who work on Indonesia and to organize major events such as this, which focus on important social, political, environmental, and other developments in Indonesia. So one event we're trying to do on an annual basis is to organize some signature activity around Human Rights Day. And this year we decided we couldn't think of a more important term than more important topic than focusing in on women's rights and gender equality. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what this very diverse, sorry, just trying to mute people as they come in, what this very diverse and fascinating group of speakers have to say to us today. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming, but a special thanks to our speakers and to Eva Nisa, of course, for chairing. And just for those of you beyond our university, just to say something about Eva. Yesterday, she was awarded a very special teaching prize by the College of Asia Pacific here at the ANU. So it's a nice occasion to not only address this important topic, but also to celebrate Eva's success. So thank you, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Paed. Thank you for the congratulations too. Okay, right. Now, so for our first panelist today, we'll have Dr. Sri Budi Eko Wardani. Dr. Sri Budi Eko Wardani is a lecturer in Department of Political Science, Universitas Indonesia. She's also the director of Center for Political Studies, Universitas Indonesia. She's taking her doctoral degree in politics at Department of Political Science, Universitas Indonesia. Some of previous notable research were Indonesian voting behavior on 1999 election in collaboration with Ohio State University, and also representation of women in national and local legislature after 2009 election, and many more great work from Ibu Dani. Please visit her page for her publications, for her full publications. Ibu Dani will talk on one of her most recent research on pursuing equal political representation. So Ibu Dani, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Eva, for introducing me. Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to be here on online discussion about women rights and women equal representation. First of all, allow me to explain my presentation in bahasa Indonesia. Bapak Ibu sekalian, saya akan saya akan menjelaskan, mendiskusikan tentang keterwakilan politik perempuan di Indonesia. Sebagai langkah awal, saya ingin mengawali dengan menceritakan bahwa saat ini saya sedang ada di kota Manado, Sulawesi Utara. Di provinsi ini, di provinsi Sulawesi Utara ini ada salah satu kabupaten, yaitu Kabupaten Minahasa, yang saat ini memiliki keterwakilan perempuan 48,57%, atau dari 35 kursi itu ada 17 perempuan dan 18 laki-laki. Jadi sudah hampir 50-50. Dan ini merupakan satu pencapaian paling tinggi dari seluruh kabupaten kota yang ada di Indonesia, sekitar 530 lebih kabupaten di Indonesia. Jadi hal itu ingin mengawali penjelasan saya tentang kondisi objektif keterwakilan perempuan di Indonesia. Ada 6 hal yang akan saya sampaikan pada presentasi hari ini terkait dengan kondisi objektif, kemudian juga ini soal isunya adalah affirmative action dan pengaruhnya kepada keterwakilan perempuan di Indonesia, kemudian juga berkaitan dengan hal itu, yaitu dampaknya pada bagaimana gender quota itu sebetulnya mempengaruhi jalur rekrutmen kandidat legislatif, baik laki-laki dan perempuan, dan ini juga punya dampak pada sebetulnya permasalahan yang ada di dalam perempuan dan politik di Indonesia. Baik, saya akan mulai pada slide pertama, silakan Pak Ed. Yang pertama ini gambaran tentang kondisi objektif perempuan dan politik di Indonesia selama era reformasi. Jadi bisa dilihat ada 3 aspek penting sebetulnya yang menjadi catatan perkembangan representasi perempuan di Indonesia. Pertama, Indonesia sudah memiliki kebijakan affirmative action, yang mulai pertama kali diterapkan pada pemilu 2004. Ya, waktu itu kita punya Undang-Undang Nomor 12 tahun 2003, di mana kebijakan afirmatif pertama kali itu diberlakukan yang sifatnya tidak wajib, hanya berupa himbauan. Nah, itu kalimatnya adalah memperhatikan keterwakilan perempuan minimal 30%, dan kemudian setelah itu diperkuat dengan penempatan perempuan di dalam kandidat list daftar calon, yaitu setiap 3 nama terdapat 1 calon perempuan. Nah, bagaimana hasilnya? Hasilnya memang cukup signifikan di dalam keterpilihannya. Jadi pencalonan itu memang punya dampak pada peningkatan jumlah yang terpilih. Kita lihat dari periode pertama affirmative action diterapkan tahun 2004 itu ada 11,8%, lalu kemudian terakhir kemarin yang pemilu 2019 itu naik menjadi 21%, atau secara absolut itu ada 120 perempuan dari 575 kursi. Dan saat ini sebetulnya jumlahnya sudah sangat meningkat, yaitu menjadi 125 kalau tidak salah, karena ada pergantian antar waktu sehingga jumlahnya meningkat. Dan bisa dilihat bahwa dari 120 perempuan terpilih itu 44%-nya memiliki latar belakang dinasti politik atau kekerabatan politik. Jadi ini sangat mempengaruhi keterpilihan perempuan. Nah, lalu bagaimana situasinya di dalam kepemimpinan, posisi-posisi pengambil kebijakan yang penting? Barangkali kita bisa mengapresiasi langkah DPR untuk memilih perempuan sebagai ketua DPR saat ini. Jadi ini untuk pertama kalinya perempuan menjadi ketua DPR, yaitu Ibu Puan Maharani. Di periode 2019 dan 2024, Ibu Puan adalah salah satu ketua dari PD Perjuangan, dan juga barangkali kita semua tahu Ibu Puan adalah anak perempuan dari mantan Presiden Megawati Soekarno Putri. Tetapi sesungguhnya dapat kita lihat bahwa di dalam kepengurusan partai politik itu jumlah perempuan yang berada pada posisi kepemimpinan atau posisi pengambilan keputusan selama 20 tahun reformasi ini itu masih sangat minim. Kita punya undang-undang partai politik yang di dalamnya memuat tentang affirmative action, yaitu partai politik harus melibatkan 30% perempuan sebagai pengurus partai politik. Tetapi partai menempatkan perempuan kepada jabatan-jabatan yang umum. Yang pasti ex officio adalah ketua bidang perempuan, itu pasti perempuan. Tetapi di jajaran sekretaris partai, di jajaran bidang pemenangan pemilu, atau di bidang kaderisasi, itu perempuan belum pernah menjabat jabatan-jabatan itu. Jadi ini kondisi objektif yang ada selama kurang lebih 20 tahun era reformasi. Sebetulnya kondisinya kalau dapat dikatakan adalah stagnan. Kalau tidak mau kita mengatakan ini sebuah kemunduran sebetulnya. Karena kita tidak bergerak kemana-mana. Next, Pak Ed, please. Ya, berikutnya. Nah, ini sekedar mengingatkan Bapak Ibu sekalian perjalanan affirmative action dan keterpilihan perempuan di DPR sejak 99 sampai 2019. Kita bandingkan, memang jelas bahwa affirmative action yang mengatur pencalonan perempuan punya dampak setidaknya pada keterpilihan. Nah, ini memang diskusi yang nanti akan saya mungkin bisa perdalam lagi. Di tahun 99 kita tidak punya kebijakan afirmatif. Hasilnya 9%. Padahal sistem pemilunya proporsional tertutup. Jadi tanpa affirmative action, partai tidak mencalonkan perempuan pada nomor urut jadi, nomor urut terpilih. Itu buktinya di 99. Maka dari itu, gerakan perempuan di awal reformasi bersatu mendorong untuk adanya affirmative action di tahun 2004 pemilu pertama. Dan Bapak Ibu bisa melihat di tahun 2009 itu ada penguatan, yaitu ada tambahan mengenai placement di kandidat list. Karena apa? Karena kalau tidak ada aturan tentang penempatan, calon perempuan itu ditempatkan di atas nomor 3. Kalau satu electoral district itu ada 10 kursi, maka perempuan biasanya ditaruh di nomor urut 4 atau 3, 6, 9 gitu. Jadi kelipatan gitu ya. 3, 6, 9. Makanya kita perlu mengatur penempatan di nomor urut 1, 2, dan 3. Jadi ini memang sebuah privilege. Partai politik boleh mencalonkan 3 nomor teratas itu perempuan semua boleh. Tetapi partai politik tidak boleh mencalonkan 3 laki-laki di nomor urut 1, 2, dan 3. Seperti itu aturannya. Nah, jadi ini barangkali mendorong penguatan itu sehingga jumlahnya sampai 21% pada 2014. Namun, siapa yang terpilih? Nah, tadi sudah saya berikan gambaran bahwa memang peningkatan persentase ketua perempuan itu sangat dipengaruhi oleh latar belakang kandidat yang berasal dari kekerabatan politik. Maka dari itu memang next slide. Dan itu memang gambarannya adalah gender quota itu sebetulnya lebih dimanfaatkan untuk kepentingan elektoral partai politik dan belum menjadi apa istilahnya dimanfaatkan gender dalam bentuk kebijakan-kebijakan yang mengurangi diskriminasi terhadap perempuan. Jadi partai politik menggunakan pencalonan perempuan sebagai strategi elektoralnya. Dan itu memang karena sudah wajib, jadi kalau kita lihat pencalonan itu memang sangat tinggi, di atas 30%. Terakhir 40% di pemilu 2019. Jadi sebetulnya tidak ada masalah, tidak ada calon perempuan. Yang arti partai politik bisa mencalonkan perempuan. Hanya masalahnya adalah ada kompetisi di internal partai sesama perempuan. Dan ini yang barangkali tidak dipikirkan juga secara jangka panjang oleh kita dari gerakan perempuan, dari civil society, bahwa ternyata memang dengan sistem open list itu memang ada dampak yang serius untuk kompetisi di internal partai sesama perempuan. Jadi partai politik strateginya adalah menghadap-hadapkan perempuan kader dengan perempuan non-kader partai. Karena tidak ada aturan dalam undang-undang batas keanggotaan seorang kandidat di dalam partai politik. Jadi hari ini dia menjadi calon, hari ini juga dia dapat kartu anggota. Jadi tidak jalan itu kaderisasi di dalam partai. Nah, sehingga memang ini terjadi pergeseran jalur rekrutmen kandidat legislatif yang bertumpu atau bergantung pada jaringan politik dan ekonomi yang disebabkan, ya harus kita katakan bahwa kita juga mendukung bahwa terbuka, tapi ini dampak yang harus disampaikan bahwa mendukung adopsi sistem open list proportional system dan ditambah dengan parliamentary threshold untuk kursi DPR yang selalu meningkat dari 2,5% menjadi 4%, sementara jumlah partai politik peserta pemilu itu lebih dari 12 partai politik, sehingga kompetisi akan semakin kuat. PD Perjuangan pemenang pemilu hanya memperoleh 20% suara. Dan itu berarti 80%-nya adalah bukan pemilih PD Perjuangan. Jadi sehingga partai kemudian menggunakan affirmative action untuk memilih perempuan yang punya potensi menang lebih banyak. Sehingga dia akan meminggirkan kader partai. Ada satu kasus misalnya, kandidat petahana atau member of parliament, kandidat petahana itu dipasang, gitu, ditaruh, diletakkan oleh partai di satu daerah pemilihan dengan anak gubernur misalnya, anak perempuan gubernur. Harapannya partai bisa 2 kursi, atau minimal 1 kursi, bisa petahana itu menang, atau bisa anak gubernur yang menang. Yang terjadi adalah yang menang anaknya gubernur, gitu. Petahana perempuannya tidak dapat kursi. Nah, ini jalurnya. Ya, boleh lanjut, Pak. Kita belajar. Jadi sebetulnya kandidat jalur kekerabatan itu tidak hanya perempuan. Partai politik juga strateginya kepada laki-laki. Tetapi memang karena ada affirmative action yang seolah-olahnya memang perempuannya ada, tapi sebetulnya perempuan yang siap untuk jadi calon itu tidak banyak. Walaupun angkanya 40%, tetapi mayoritas itu sebetulnya bukan kader partai. Nah, jadi laki-laki di sini tracknya adalah biasanya mantan kepala daerah, itu kemudian pindah jalur ke legislatif, menjadi anggota DPR, atau memang jalur keluarga elit politik. Itu ada 39 orang atau 88,5%. Sementara perempuan itu jalurnya biasanya istri dari incumbent atau current regional head atau kepala daerah yang sekarang, dan juga anak perempuan dari ketua partai atau mantan anggota DPR sebelumnya. Dan jumlah itu 53 orang dari 120. Ini fenomena yang meningkat dari 2014 yang waktu itu hanya kurang lebih sekitar 23%, begitu sekarang mencapai 44%. Nah, ini contohnya di slide selanjutnya, mungkin bisa ditampilkan. Nah, ini gambarannya dari riset yang kami lakukan. Itu kalau dari laki-laki memang kelihatan yang paling banyak itu dari 39 orang adalah anak laki-laki dari ketua partai. Jadi di dalam DPR itu ada anak laki-laki dari ketua partai, baik di tingkat nasional maupun di tingkat daerah. Kemudian juga saudara kandung dari kepala daerah misalnya. Nah, di perempuan itu kita lihat memang ada 15 orang adalah istri dari incumbent atau current regional head and deputies atau wakilnya. Jadi dia bekerja dia sebagai istri kepala daerah, tapi juga pada bersamaan dia jadi anggota DPR yang stay-nya di Jakarta gitu. Dan ini memang penting untuk dicatat. Kemudian yang kedua adalah anak perempuan dari elit partai. Jadi dan juga bisa saudara kandung itu adik laki-laki, adik perempuan atau kakak perempuan yang memang kemudian dicalonkan. Nah, jadi ini gambarannya, mungkin bisa lanjut Pak slide-nya. Nah, jadi gambaran pertama memang kalau kita ingin memetakan masalah perempuan, keterwakilan perempuan di Indonesia, ya affirmative action itu sudah sesuatu yang memang dibutuhkan. Tetapi memang dia akan menjadi sangat barangkali punya persoalan ketika atau tidak kondusif ketika dikaitkan dengan open proportional election system. Dan karena perempuan memiliki pengalaman yang tertinggal, yang terlambat dari laki-laki dalam dunia politik. Dan juga pencalonannya itu sendiri transaksional. Kemudian tadi sudah saya sampaikan juga soal strategi elektoral partai politik. Nah, ini agak dilematik buat perempuan. Perempuan memang punya potensi menang itu kalau dicalonkan oleh partai besar. Karena potensi partai besar memperoleh kursi itu bisa lebih dari 1. Tetapi ya mereka belum tentu dicalonkan di nomor urut 1 gitu. Nah, jadi memang ini lagi-lagi rekrutmennya berdasarkan tadi soal politik dan jaringan ekonomi. Lanjut slide berikutnya. Nah, juga ada relasi kuasa yang tidak setara. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita harus sampaikan bahwa perempuan yang dicalonkan itu sebetulnya memang di satu sisi kita bisa katakan mereka punya otonomi dalam mengambil keputusan. Tetapi partai politik, elit partai politik itu biasanya menghubungi para suaminya. Jadi pada kasus misalnya kepala daerah yang menghubungi bupati atau gubernur, lalu meminta istri sebagai calon. Gitu. Jadi memang relasinya lagi-lagi kebutuhannya adalah kebutuhan patriarki untuk bisa melanjutkan kepemimpinan di dalam dunia politik. Karena diskriminasi terhadap perempuan itu masih terjadi. Kekerasan dalam rumah tangga.
Satu menit lagi.
Ya. Dan kedua adalah yang berikutnya adalah soal tata kelola partai yang masih bias gender. Jadi ini kita belum bisa memang runtuhkan tembok partai itu karena revisi undang-undang partai politik sampai hari ini belum bisa dilakukan. Selanjutnya adalah yang terakhir sekali adalah gerakan perempuan. Nah, ini juga jadi satu isu juga ketika ada perubahan jalur rekrutmen itu mempengaruhi siapa yang kemudian dicalonkan, dan gerakan perempuan barangkali kemudian memiliki keterputusan hubungan dengan perempuan yang terpilih saat ini. Jadi tidak match antara gagasan dengan kemudian agenda-agenda yang ada di dalam DPR. Nah, terakhir sekali rekomendasi barangkali ini semacam slide terakhir berikutnya. Jadi penting buat kita ke depan barangkali untuk memberdayakan, memperkuat perempuan politisi. Misalnya salah satu yang sedang kita pikirkan adalah bagaimana kebijakan affirmative action itu diperkuat dengan pendanaan afirmatif untuk mendorong keterpilihan perempuan atau kesetaraan politik bagi laki-laki dan perempuan di dalam partai politik itu semakin baik. Saya pikir demikian, Ibu Eva. Thank you very much for your attention. Back to Ibu Eva as moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a fantastic talk, Ibu Dani, and Pak Ed for helping Ibu Dani. I'm sure many participants have lots of questions. You could start typing your questions in the chat box or save it for our Q&A session later. And I think I should mention here too that perhaps none of the topics that our speakers are focusing today are mutually exclusive. So I'm sure that Ibu Dani's talk is also related to what other panelists are going to focus today. Okay, now I'd like to invite our second panelist, Dr. Marcia Sumukil. Dr. Marcia is the director of IPAS Indonesia. Prior to joining IPAS, Dr. Marcia worked for several international organizations within Indonesia in the areas of HIV, adolescent reproductive health, maternal and newborn health, and health governance. And Dr. Marcia is a trained medical doctor and began her career as a general practice physician in a community health clinic. She also holds a Master's of Public Health degree from University of Melbourne, Australia. She currently serves on the boards of the Indonesia AIDS Coalition. We are delighted to have you, Ibu Marcia, to share your expertise on women's sexual reproductive rights and health. So Ibu Marcia, over to you.
Thank you, Eva Nisa. Let me try to share my screen first. Okay. Yeah. Oops. Okay. Okay, thank you. Good morning from Bandung. Thank you, ANU Indonesia Institute, for inviting me to this important event and to talk about women's rights and gender equality in Indonesia. So today I will share some of the issues surrounding women's sexual and reproductive rights and health based on IPAS Indonesia experience working with various stakeholders, including civil society organizations, to ensure that women and girls can fully exercise their rights in Indonesia. So I think we all agree that Indonesian women are central to the country's economic, social, and cultural life. As Indonesia populations and economy grows, it is essential not to leave them behind. This means putting their needs and their rights at the forefront to enable them to transform their lives and in turn transform their country, economic and social development. Meeting Indonesia's women and girls' reproductive health needs and upholding their rights offers significant opportunity, both all for health, human rights, and economic benefit. And it is also critical to meet SDG 3 and 5. And I think government Indonesia has showed some level of commitment to address some issues of SRHR when they signed CEDAW and ICPD. And also there are some national policy that directly related to women's SRHR, which is the Health Law number 36, 2009, and then there's a subsequent government regulations, PP number 61, 2014 on reproductive health, and we also have a population law in 2009, and there are other national policies that actually supporting how women's sexual and reproductive health and rights can be fulfilled. So let us see the situations at the moment. So I think despite of progress for the last 40 years trying to reduce maternal mortality, but we've seen that until now, Indonesia is ranked at the fourth in Asia Pacific with the highest maternal mortality rate, second in Southeast Asia, And this is, I think it is really so unfortunate, considering that our economic growth significantly improved. We are once considered as a middle income country, but the maternal mortality rate is almost the same with a country from lower economic development level. And at the same time, we've also seen after the decentralizations, how the role of the national family planning bureaus is actually weakened because they're not considered as technical ministries, so they don't have offices at the district level. And in 2017, we see that 11%, there's an 11% unmet needs for family planning amongst married women, so it is only amongst married women who wants to space or who wants to prevent their pregnancy. 11% of them cannot access contraceptions. And at the same time, at the moment, the modern contraceptive prevalence rate, so women who use modern contraceptions, is slowly decreasing, while the use of traditional contraceptive methods is slowly increasing. And even amongst those who use the modern contraceptive methods, that which we know have the highest efficacy and efficiency, 34% drop out from using the modern contraception. So it is not, as the result, we can see, although we don't have data on unintended pregnancy, but a study on Guttmacher Institute and FKMUI in 2019 actually estimated, using their methodology, estimated that there are 1.69 million of abortion in Java Island only in 2018. And this is actually a quite huge number, considering that the government used the target for delivery at 5.5 million for all over Indonesia. So there's some issues on which one is like the truth number, because I think with the existing target on maternal on delivery rate, there is still a lot of questions where that number comes from. And we also see at the moment age-specific fertility rate among women 15 to 19 years old at 36 per 1,000. And this one is decreasing from the previous IDHS 2012. And I think it also raised a lot of questions among epidemiology and public health experts why the number is decreasing, while at the same time there's no significant policies and programs that addressing young women adolescent health needs or adolescent young women sexual needs. But also some of the explanation maybe can be attributed to there's at the moment in Indonesia online market seller, we can see a lot of medical abortion drugs available, even though in the real pharmacies in Indonesia we could not find it, but people can easily access that from the internet. But also the increase in the number of first marriage among Indonesian young women. The other situation is still the patriarchal system, which still embedded in many of the Indonesian society, where women has to request permissions. For example, in contraception, there is still 7% of Indonesian women depends on husband or spousal approval, even though the male doesn't have much knowledge on contraception. They still depend on that. And also there's a lot of abortion stigma and low SRHR knowledge and harmful social norms. For example, female genital mutilation that still exists, and child marriages also still exist in some of Indonesian society that really harmful to women's health and reproductive rights. And we also have issues on unclear legal status, especially for survivors of gender-based violence. Because even though the regulation exists, that they need to access comprehensive care that involve physical and psychological and social issues, but that kind of service still not existed at the moment. And I think another important issue is that these all national figures actually mask huge diversity, huge inequities at the subnational level due to differences in delivery, in the capacity to deliver basic social services, as well as the health infrastructures by local government. For example, there's an estimations that maternal mortality rate in Papua is 3 to 4 times the national figures. So I think it is also important to note that there are a lot of women in Indonesia, especially from the minority group or coming from different geographical areas, that might not enjoy or might not have access to quality services that is available in more developed regions of Indonesia. So I think at the moment, the challenge related to women's sexual and reproductive rights and health is the restrictive laws and regulations, and also policies in reproductive health, including on abortion and unintended pregnancy. For example, the population law only regulates that contraception is only available for married person. So young women, adolescents, girls who are sexually active cannot access this kind of family planning services. The second one also, for example, abortion. Safe abortion is only allowed for 2 situations in Indonesia. The first one, unintended pregnancy resulted from rape, but it's only up to 6 weeks that they can terminate their pregnancy. But even though it is regulated since 2009, but there's no services at the moment in 2021 available for as the implementation of this law. And abortion.
Marcia, sorry, 1 more minute.
And abortion is also allowed for medical indications. And there are disharmony between various national laws, including penal code, health law, and child law that actually put women on higher risk. Another thing is social taboos and expectations around women and pregnancy. So mostly around it's using heteronormative view that women could not have sex before marriage, and once they get married, they need to have children. Conservative social attitude toward SRHR among policymakers and service providers, and decentralizations and fragmented approaches between national ministry. So I think there are lots of current efforts, and this is not only the work of IPAS, but we collaborate and we are part of a bigger movement on realizing women's sexual and reproductive rights, including working with the like Fifi and the colleagues, and also with Magdalene. While the intention is actually to make sure that the government have a policy and programs that can serve the needs of women in terms of their sexual and reproductive rights, but also the community support women so they have the knowledge and agency to access the services. I think that's all from me, Mbak Eva. Thank you so much for giving the time to present. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Marcia, for the wonderful presentation. We learned a lot from you. And again, I'd like to remind audience to save your questions or start typing your questions. We'll move now to Ms. Anindya Restuviani, or Mbak Vivi. Mbak Vivi is Program Director of Jakarta Feminist and Co-Director of Hola Back Jakarta. She is a feminist activist with expertise in gender equality and a history of working in the development sector on issues of gender, children, and vulnerable youth, with strong experience in feminist advocacy and organizing within grassroots communities and at the local, national, and global level. Mbak Vivi, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mbak Eva. And once again, I also would like to congratulate you for the award. And thank you so much for, moderating the sessions. And I think I just also wanted to say good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for having me. And it's such an honor to share a panel with this amazing woman today. As I was being introduced by Eva, my name is Anidia Restubiani, or you can call me Vivi. And currently I work with Lintas Feminist Jakarta, or mostly known as Jakarta Feminist. So for all of you who probably are still not aware of who is Jakarta Feminist, so we are a civil society collective that, as its name, it's working towards gender equality by amplifying the intersectional feminist value within our work. And since 2014, we work collectively with many women and also marginalized rights organizations to mainstream feminist discussions and advocacy all across Indonesia and also Southeast Asia, which one of the key focus that we are working on right now is on the issue of gender-based violence, that we are working to advocate the rights of victims and survivors of gender-based violence, especially in Indonesia. I think many of us are aware that the situations of gender-based violence is something that is very urgent things that needs to be addressed. I'm pretty sure it's not in Indonesia, but I think from myself that I'm just going to talk about the situation that is we are actually facing right now in Indonesia. So I don't have a lot of presentations actually for today, but I just wanted to show the research or the survey that we did in 2020, which is the situations where when we already in the pandemic situation, which we know that the response that the government of Indonesia has for the COVID-19 pandemic does not have, or until now still not have, a lot of gender sensitivity, or maybe a value in the way that they respond to the pandemic, that actually a lot of people call that gender-based violence has become one of the shadow pandemic during the COVID-19. So without further ado, I just wanted to show you the research, the result of the survey, just a bit of a just to flag that the video will be in Bahasa Indonesia, but it will be very visual. So I hope that you will understand the video itself because there's a lot of pictures that kind of explain a lot for the survey.
Pandemi COVID-19 tidak hanya bahaya pada kesehatan kita. Sebenarnya, pandemi ini juga menyebabkan peningkatan kasus dan frekuensi kekerasan berbasis gender. Berdasarkan penelitian baru dari Perkumpulan Lintas Feminis Jakarta, selama pandemi COVID-19 terdapat banyak orang yang mengalami kekerasan berbasis gender untuk pertama kali. 22% responden survei kami baru mengalami kekerasan sejak awalnya pandemi. Kekerasan verbal, psikis, dan seksual merupakan jenis kekerasan yang paling banyak terjadi selama pandemi. Kekerasan online juga mengalami peningkatan besar. Seharusnya kita bisa merasa aman di mana saja kita berada. Sayangnya, karena kita harus berdiam saja di rumah saat pandemi, tempat tinggal malah menjadi tempat yang paling berbahaya bagi banyak orang. Lebih dari separuh korban mengalami kekerasan di tempat tinggal. Artinya, banyak korban mengenal pelaku kekerasan. Banyak korban juga mengalami kekerasan lebih sering dan lebih intens dari sebelumnya. Sepertiga korban mengatakan frekuensi kekerasan bertambah selama pandemi dan hampir separuh menyatakan intensitas kekerasan juga meningkat. Hampir 3/4 korban mengenal pelaku kekerasan. Sayangnya, sekitar 25% kekerasan tersebut dilakukan oleh suami, istri, atau pacar korban. Antara korban yang pertama kali mengalami kekerasan saat pandemi, lebih dari 80% mengalami penurunan pendapatan keluarga. Jika Anda mengalami kekerasan atau tahu seseorang yang mengalami kekerasan, kunjungi carilayanan.com untuk mengetahui layanan terdekat Anda.
So one of the things that we found during the national survey, I hope that you can understand the whole video. We're trying to make it as explainable as possible with the visual. But one of the things that I think most of the data that we receive in terms of who are the perpetrators, and all of them are something that is commonly known within the context of gender-based violence in Indonesia. Even the National Commissions Against Violence of Women, or Komnas Perempuan, mentioned that most of the perpetrators are actually people that were, very close or known by the victim or the survivors itself. But I think during the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the things that we highlighted is based on the national report of Komnas Perempuan itself, there is a decreasing number of reports that is actually, or cases that is being reported, but it does not mean that the case itself is actually decreasing, the number of cases. So that's one of the reasons why we decided to do this survey which is a national, and it is a nationwide survey. And I think from the previous video that you can see that there are increasing numbers of cases. It mentions that around 22% of the respondent mentioned that this is the first time they actually experience harassment, which is during the COVID-19 pandemics. There is also a big correlations in terms of the financial situation that they face, which is more than 80% of the respondent mentioned that there is a significant difference of their financial situations within their household that actually led to gender-based violence. Other than that, we also see that the intensity and also the frequency of gender-based violence is actually also increasing. But based on this research that based on the survey and then we know that there is actually a number of cases, there's many new numbers of cases, but why the reporting itself is actually decreasing. There must be a problem within what is actually going on. Is there is the information itself in terms of how to report and where to report, it's not accessible, or the reporting or the law enforcement or even the law itself is actually not accommodating enough to the victims and survivors of gender-based violence. So during the survey, we also asked another questions, which is what is actually the problem of reporting in terms of the gender-based violence situation in Indonesia. So we're gonna I'm going to show you the second video, which is the result of the second questions that I just mentioned.
Selama pandemi COVID-19, penelitian Perkumpulan Lintas Feminis Jakarta menemukan bahwa hanya separuh korban kekerasan berbasis gender menceritakan kekerasan yang dialami kepada orang lain. Kebanyakan korban kekerasan selama pandemi memilih untuk berbagi cerita dengan teman saja. Tidak sampai 10% melaporkan kejadian kepada lembaga layanan. Mungkin ini karena ternyata kurang dari 50% mengetahui bahwa lembaga layanan itu sudah ada di Indonesia dan bersedia membantu korban. Kabar baiknya adalah hampir semua laporan korban kekerasan diterima oleh lembaga layanan dan mayoritasnya diproses dengan cepat. Namun banyak korban mengeluh tentang proses pelaporan kepada kepolisian. Dari seluruh responden korban, hanya 7% melaporkan kepada kepolisian. Yang lain tidak berani atau mengalami kesulitan akses karena kondisi pandemi. 8 dari 12 responden yang bekerja di lembaga layanan mengatakan bahwa sejumlah pengaduan meningkat selama pandemi COVID-19. Namun mereka tetap mendampingi korban semampunya. Sepertiga responden lembaga layanan hanya menerima laporan secara daring selama pandemi, demi keamanan, pendamping maupun korban. 2/3 responden lembaga lainnya mengatakan lembaga mereka mengalami kesulitan pendanaan, kurangnya sumber daya manusia, dan kurangnya APD. Semua temuan ini menunjukkan bahwa Indonesia masih mengalami persoalan besar dengan kekerasan berbasis gender. Kita semua harus ikut serta menghentikan kekerasan sebelum terjadi. Jika Anda mengalami kekerasan atau tahu seseorang yang mengalami kekerasan, kunjungi carilayanan.com untuk mengetahui layanan terdekat Anda.
So I think based on the survey, we found that there are actually like maybe 2 or 3 main problems that we figure out during the reporting process. The first one is definitely the lack of information of where to report. A lot of people associating reporting to actually report to the law enforcement, which is to go to the police. And then because of that, and we all know that the legal framework of Indonesia itself is not very accommodating in terms of fulfilling the rights of victims and also survivors of gender-based violence, we have a very limited policy that are actually talking about the rights of the victims and survivors itself. I think most of the law that we have right now, which is in the penal code, we only regulate, I think, two article that only mention rape and also molestation, which has with both of them have very limited definitions of what is rape and also what is molestation, which translated into there is no certain guarantee that the rights of the victims of gender-based survivors of gender-based violence, the one that Marcia already mentions, even on their rights to actually access safe abortions as the victims of rape itself. It's such a ridiculous law, putting that the limitations of it is only 6 weeks. Like most of us probably will not know that we are pregnant until it reached to certain weeks of pregnancy, right? So I think that's quite ridiculous to put that, and that's why it's so hard to be able to access that kind of rights for the victims and survivors of gender-based violence. Other than that, there is definitely a lack of a sensitivity towards gender, and also or within the perspective of victims and also survivors of gender-based violence, that is being that is being acknowledged or actually being implemented by the law enforcement. We receive a lot of reports when there's a lot of victim blamings and even degrading questions that is being questioned by the law enforcers itself, that actually led to why a lot of people are very reluctant to report their case of sexual and gender-based violence to law enforcers. But I think one of the things, based on this survey that we did in 2020, that we released in 2021, we at Jakarta Feminist, and also looking at how the engagement, especially through especially within young people in Indonesia that use a lot of social media in terms of speaking up about a lot of gender-based violence and also sexual harassment cases on Twitter, on Instagram, and all of that. And I think we decided to create this platform, as we call it, as carilayanan.com, which is it is actually a website directory that provide informations on service providers and where you can actually report the harassment or the case itself. When I mentioned about reporting, it's not necessarily reporting to law enforcement, but actually finding service provider that would be able to assist you to actually receive the rights that you will require. So I'm just going to show you the look of the visual of the website. So you can go to carilayanan.com, and this is the first page that you will see. You can find service provider based on the category of things that you will need, which is the law, the legal aid, consultation, safe houses, medical help itself, and also cases based on who are actually experiencing the sexual violence are they children or are they actually people with disability? And you can also filter it through cities or province or the locations of where the harassment is actually happening. So I think other thing that we actually during the development of Cari Layanan, we also aware that when it comes to victim and survivors of gender-based violence, safety is the biggest priority. So our website does not collect data or any information from the people who use the service. So we basically this is a bridge for people to be able to find where they can find help, so they can directly contact the service provider listed. We also have a mask address, which is belipotbunga.com. Maybe Kate here from Jakarta Feminist can help me type the mask address. The intentions of having a mask address is because we know several victim and survivor who live with their abuser probably not comfortable looking at carilayanan.com. So we have a mass address, so people will not know that they are actually looking for services, but they will think that, oh, they are just trying to buy a pot bunga, which is a flower face. So there's a exit button that will follow you everywhere you go, that if you feel that you are threatened or you're not safe, you can directly click the exit button. It will direct you to a YouTube channel. One more thing that I just wanted to also highlight is right now we are trying to develop a Twitter bot that will automatically reply to anyone tweeting about harassment, as long as they have a certain keyword such as harassment, tolong, kekerasan, pelecehan, or sexual violence, and all of that in one tweet without having to mention cari layanan. But I think currently we receive a lot of not receive, but we are facing a lot of challenge in terms of policy on Twitter itself. And just to yes, I know. Yes, I know. I'm going to stop sharing right now, but just one thing that I think a lot of people will also ask us about, what about people who do not have internet access? And one of the things that we do with Cari Layanan, we also partner with 5 legal aids or LBH Apik all across Indonesia that basically trying to help in terms of outreaching people who actually do not have access to internet connections. The LBH Apik are in Medan, Jakarta, Semarang, Makassar, and also Kupang. So I think that's it for me, Ma Eva. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Mbak Vivi, for the fantastic presentation and a very important information too, the link that you gave us. So that's great. And your presentation is also very, very timely. It reminds us again that the pandemic is not gender neutral. And again, I'd like to remind you all to type your question in the chat box or save it for our Q&A session. Let's move on to our 4th panelist. This is like a marathon. We have Dr. Diana Contreras please excuse me poor pronunciation. Diana Contreras Suarez. Dr. Diana is a senior research fellow at the Melbourne Institute of Applied Economic and Social Research. Her research is driven by questions on how to improve the lives of vulnerable and disadvantaged populations, and also focuses on understanding human capital formation throughout the life cycle, as well as how public policy or programs work on achieving improved lives. She uses econometrics techniques, sounds fancy, to look into those questions with most of her expertise in developing countries, including Indonesia. So Dr. Diana is going to share her expertise again on the gender pay gap today and female labor force participation in Indonesia. Diana, over to you.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I just want to check if everyone can see my screen. Great. So I'm going to start by thanking Eva for inviting me to this panel. That's very exciting. Basically, what I am going to be presenting today would be an overview of the female labor force participation in Indonesia. I'm going to also be talking about how women transition in the labor market when important parts of life comes to them, which is like when they get married and when they start having children. And then finally, I will talk about the gender wage gap. What I am going to present was work that was joint work with Professor Lisa Cameron. And this was a collaboration that we did with the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Economic Governance that at that time was called IPEG. So to start with, I'm going to present this kind of overview of what's the situation. And we have been talking a little bit about it throughout the panel today. So basically, labor force participation in Indonesia is low. And what you can see in this area here is that once you compare Indonesia with other countries in Asia, it is quite lower compared to the neighbors. And so the way this graph is organized is by level of development of the country. So Indonesia is kind of, as it was mentioned before, it has been growing a lot during the last couple of decades. There is less reliance on agriculture. There is an increase. Industrialization has increased, and also urbanization, and also there is an increase in incomes. And what we can see is that still Indonesia is kind of a little bit lower than the neighbor countries relative to the level of development. Not only it is low, but also it hasn't been changing over all those years. So here is like the last 3 decades, and what we see is like very little movement, with men being very constant over 80%, but women being very constant around 50%. So this phenomenon is quite puzzling because Indonesia has been making a lot of progress, especially investing a lot of resources in educating women. So educational attainment for women has been increasing. There has also been a decrease in fertility rates, but we cannot see this reflected on how women are experiencing the labor market in Indonesia. I just want to say, like, if I am speaking too fast for the interpreters, do you let me know, because I just get very excited and I just forget to speak slowly. So just feel free to let me know. So in this graph, what I am presenting is how this gender gap in the labor participation, so this is comparing men to women, how do they transition, or how does it happen along the life cycle? And what we see in general here is that the gap widens during this during the ages between 20 and 40, where the gap is the largest, and that's when women are usually having kids. So what we see, for example, is that at age 20, which is on average when people are finishing studying, more than 90% of men are working, but by age 20. But if you look at women, this is quite low, and this grows. So in comparison to men, which the growth is very sharp, they go from 40% to almost more than 90% in just a few years, between 15 and 20. We don't see that increase for women, and in fact, it's very, very slow. And it doesn't come to a peak, let's say, after they are 45 years old. So when you think about women starting in the labor market when they are 45, the type of jobs that they are going to find are very, very lower quality than if they are going to start very early on. So here is what we would call in economics is just a depreciation of the human capital. So they were studying, they did some studies up to when they were 20, then they were completely disengaged from the labor market. And when they start 25 years later, they have forgotten more likely the things that they were studying early on. So there are a lot of consequences from having this gap. In this second graph, what we also are showing is that if we compare, let's say, women, because maybe it's not a realistic comparison to compare men to women because everyone has different preferences. But when we compare women who don't have children, like, let's say, non-married women, to female who are married, what we see is this big gap as well. So let's say the right comparison is those women who are not married. And what we see is that around a little bit above 70% of those women would be working. But if we look at women who are married and likely are having children, this participation is much, much lower. And what is interesting is that it overlaps around 50 years. So when women are starting to decide not to participate any longer, that's when kind of married women are still participating in the labor market, still at really high levels. And we also find this difference in the third graph on the right between the ages that the kids could have and how is the participation. So what we see is, like, as you would expect, women who have kids that are between 0 and 2 that require more attention and being closer to the mom, more likely is where the participation is the lowest. And as kids grow up, then participation increases, but it's not until very late that really women would start participating in the labor market. So we see that there are kind of the restrictions are related to marriage and related as well to children age. So there is, when we look at this type of plot in other countries, what we usually observe, it's a phenomenon where it's like it increases very rapidly and then it decreases while they are having kids and they increases again. And we don't observe this in Indonesia. The way we hypothesize that basically what is happening is that women are in anticipation that they are going to get married and they are going to have trouble in the labor market. They are just not entering the labor market. So here we look at what happened in the transitions in the labor market when in those key events, which is marriage and having the first child and the second child. And what we find is from all the women, around 9 million women who are between 20 and 24 are not working, and they could have been working. during that age. So the blue line at the top is showing women who are single. What's the participation along the life cycle? So you would start here when everyone is studying, when they are 17 and between 15 and 17, and they start increasing their participation. And then we have the red line, which is the average age which women get married in Indonesia, which is around 22. And we see like a little drop between participation in the labor market. So this could be in anticipation of women are still not having kids, or they don't have a kid yet, but they are anticipating that that's going to happen, and they now have to start taking care of the household. So then they drop the labor market, and then the biggest drop happened when they have the first child. So here is only 50% would be participating in the labor market. What we find is with the second child, there is not an additional drop. So the ones who drop for the first child, they stay out for the second child. So there is not much of a change here. But then we also observe that the share of working women in formal employment decreases with marriage and each child. So here what we are showing is that what is the share of formal employment by age? And by formal employment, we mean the percentage of women who have like a wage employment in comparison to women who are working more like self-employed, or they have a casual job, or they are working per parcel or per piece type of jobs. It also includes those who are working as a family worker, or the ones who are working with no pay. So what we see here is, again, kind of a life cycle. Most of the women would start working in a formal employment, and that increases as women get older. By marriage, this decreases quite massively, which is a 17 percentage point decrease by women getting married. And then there is another drop once they have the first child, which is around age 23. And it's like the biggest drop. And in contrast to female labor force participation, when we look at the proportion of women who stay in a formal job, with the second child, it also decreases massively. So this could suggest that basically the formal employment the formal sector in Indonesia is very inflexible for women. So they don't find how to stay. And it's really hard to look at this problem, because it's like you have the two sides. You have the women who really find really hard to stay there because they want more flexibility to be able to juggle both sides, like their home responsibilities and also their job responsibilities. But on the other side, you can also infer that the firms and the companies are not making much effort to help them to stay. So it's just kind of a both sides problem in this sense. So what we hypothesize is that most of women are going to go into the informal sector, because in the informal sector, they could maybe have more flexible conditions, and then they would be able to kind of juggle better the household responsibilities with the working responsibilities. Then the last point is showing what's the gender wage gap. So the way this analysis is done is basically you take two individuals who have exactly the same level of education, they work in the same industry, they have the same age, they have the same number of years of interruptions, and you compare what's the wage. So they are working, let's say, in a similar job, and then you compare what is the wage difference, and the only difference between them is that one is a man and the other one is a woman. So when we look at that, what we see is that, so we do this analysis separating the formal sector and the informal sector, and what we find is like, although in both the gaps are quite larger, the phenomenon is a little bit different. So in the formal sector, what we find is what we call the sticky floor, which is at the bottom of the earning distribution, which is this part here on the left. So 66% is the difference between how much a man and a woman earn at the bottom of the earning distribution, which is pretty large. And as you start going with along the distribution of earnings towards the top earners of the country, and you compare the top earner men with the top earner women, the difference is only 13%. Right, so the difference is smaller, but it still is quite significant. Then the difference between the green part and the red part is how much it is explained by those differences in human capital. And human capital here is which industry do they, what level of education do they have, how much training do they have, also about the choices, which is, for example, in which industry do they work. So maybe women tend, and we know that women tend to choose industries where there are lower payments, so they are more towards providing care, like service industry, and there is lower payment in those industries. So once we control for all of that, we can, let's say at the bottom, we can explain 39% of these differences between the wages that men and women earn. But all the rest is what we call in economics discrimination. So this is all the things that are not related to how women and men are differently qualified to do a job, but it's just how the market is compensating them for the work. And what we see very strikingly is that the informal sector, it's pretty homogeneous across the earnings. So even if you are a very minimum wage earner or a very low earner during your months, the gap between men and women is pretty huge, and it decreases a little bit as they increases the earnings, but it still is pretty large. So it's 46%. So basically at the top, women earn 50% of what the top men earns. So this is pretty striking. In terms of just kind of some policy implications, what we see is that the growth of the female labor force participation will continue to be slow or basically inexistent unless policies are developed to support married women to juggle family and work responsibilities. We find that the main issue appears to be the formal sector, which is not equipped to retain women when they have a family. And it's possibly that they are actually not even trying to promote women to stay in the formal sector. We also think that maybe promoting some cultural change that encourages companies to develop policies to retain women would be very important. So it's not only that is good for the women, but also it's good for the company to retain their women. So they spend time and resources training women. And the fact that they think that that's not valuable is not good also for the same companies. So having some policies related to family-friendly work, like flexible hours, on compressed week, allowing part-time work with the same benefits as full-time work would also be beneficial for women in the formal sector. Other solutions like telecommuting and working from home, which it was completely unthinkable when we started working on this project, which was before COVID. But I think one of the positive things, if you want to think about positive things on the pandemic, is that it has shown many employers that employees are able to do their job efficiently and well if they are working from home. So if you think of a environment where women would have access to childcare and they will have they are able to take their kids to school or to the childcare, and they are close to home, so they are able to do pickups and all of that stuff that usually is not very compatible with a normal 8 to 6 type of a schedule, then that would allow women to continue working once they have these household responsibilities. And also other type of arrangements like job sharing that would allow women to, be able to work maybe lower hours, but be able to be compensated accordingly with that. So work-based childcare provision in particular would be very beneficial, especially for women who have levels of education lower than tertiary. In our analysis, what we found is that women with who are tertiary educated usually don't face the same restrictions. In general, they can afford to pay someone to help them with some household and children responsibilities. But the middle of the women are the ones who usually find these harder, and they won't be able to access privately these. So maybe the government could also play an important role in this part. And at the end, all those measures are likely not only to increase firm profitability, but also generate economic growth. but also it could improve the situation of the households. And at the end, the entire country will benefit from using the skills of half of its population. That's it for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. What an excellent presentation, Diana. Thanks so much. I feel like I want to jump into the Q&A session straight away. Thank you so much, Diana. Okay, we'll move now to Ibu Devi Asmarani, our final speaker. Ibu Devi is the editor-in-chief and co-founder of Women-Focused Web Magazine, Magdalene. Her 25 years experience in journalism began at the Jakarta Post, followed by the Straits Times of Singapore, where she wrote news reports, in-depth articles, and also analysis on various issues from politics, conflicts, terrorism to natural disasters. She has also written articles, essays, as well as works of fiction for various local and international publications. And Ibu Devi, this is the most exciting one, is the recipient of SK Trimurti Awards for her work in promoting gender equality in journalism. Congratulations, Ibu Devi. Today, she'll be speaking on women in the media and building a feminist voice. Over to you, Ibu Devi.
Thank you so much, Ibu Eva. Let me share the screen and do let me know if you can see this. And if everything's okay? Okay, good, thank you. First of all, thank you, Ibu Eva, and thank you, ANU Indonesia Institute, for inviting me to this event. I really enjoyed listening to all the presentation, and I'm probably gonna ask for the presentation later for myself. So good morning and good day to all of you. Before I begin, for some levity, I'm just gonna start with a story, which is not necessarily true, and I don't remember where I heard it first, but it's a story involving a crime case and a journalist covering the event. So the setting is, just imagine this, a street in Indonesia, let's say Jakarta. There's some commotions and lots of police and police line, and this one journalist who arrives early approached one of the police at the crime scene, and he asks what happened. And the police answers, well, there's been an assault. One female was found unconscious, wearing only her underwear. So the journalist asks again, what do you think is the motive? And the police answers, well, it's floral, reddish, with a bit of laces. So obviously this is a joke, not true story, but as a facilitator and trainer of gender and media in Indonesia, which is my other head, I often tell this story when I'm talking about gender and media in Indonesia, because the sad truth is that a lot of the time, a lot of online media in Indonesia, this is how they actually frame news stories about murdered women, as you can see in this one. This story, the headline of the body of a pretty near naked woman found. So the emphasis is always on the woman's physicality. And it's not just when they're writing about dead women, they're also doing this when they're writing about women who are still alive. The coverage is not any better. If you can see in these three just examples that I show, there's a lot of sexism there, a lot of even kind of misogynistic way of portraying women. And so when we talk about gender and media in Indonesia, the problems are still quite classic and universal. Of course, there's still, women are still underrepresented in the media. I think in the global setting, there's 17% of women in are interviewed or have, are quoted in the media coverage of news. In Indonesia, that number is lower. Tempo Institute did a survey on several print and online media a few years ago, and they found that 11% of people interviewed in the media are women. So only 11%. And a lot of them are on issues stereotypically associated with women, like lifestyle and health and beauty and things like that. And there's, as you can see in my previous slide, there's still really strong objectification. There's use of the word pretty, sexy, and other similar adjectives when describing women, ranging from CEO, politicians to, as you can see, dead women. There's still sexism in the way that the media are framing or their news stories, reinforcing women's role in the domestic realm. always highlighting marital status and domestic roles. And there's also stereotyping as, like placing women in certain kind of career, or highlighting women's as the main carer of their domestic of their home, and that women have to look and act a certain way. And then this is, I'm sure Vivi is familiar with this, but reports on sexual violence often result in more violence to women, because although the most media no longer identify the victims, but often some of the details can be revealing, and the framing of the news stories can also imply victim blaming. So there's no kind of victim perspective, and there's no gender sensitivity in much of the media, in the way that the media cover sexual violence or gender-based violence. And then another thing that is quite huge is the heterocentrism within the, because homosexuality and other gender expressions other than the binary gender expression that we know are still a concept that is seen as Western concept, and is still tied to morality. So the media still either underrepresent or poorly represent gender and sexual minorities. And if there is some cases, criminal cases that involve them, there's a lot of sensationalism. There's also a lot of stereotyping, and all of this just strengthens the stigma and even dehumanizing this, communities. In general, women issues are still often just seasonal issues, and often are portrayed in a kind of patronizing or simplistic or superficial ways, wavering between showing, women of no agency, or, just glorifying or highlighting heroic aspects, or glorifying success of certain people with privileges. And there's, kind of little nuances that, that can show the kind of the spectrum of womanhood in all its, entirety. And so definitely no intersectional approach to covering women's or gender issues. So within this context, 8 years ago, my co-founder Hera and I, at the time, we were freelance journalists and consultant with a combined experience of maybe 20 years or more. We decided to start a new platform, a new media platform. At the time, we wanted to target women because we also saw that aside from the masculine perspective of mainstream media, women-focused media were still also not doing service to women with, providing content that are mostly lifestyle-related, beauty, celebrity issues, and promoting a certain and unrealistic beauty standard. So, and we saw that this, this creates a lot of problems, including body image issues, toxic masculinity, and all the way to rape culture. So we established Magdalene in 2013. At the time, we started in English because both of us have always written in English. But as we progress, we realized that we can reach out to a lot more people if we write in Indonesian. So right now it's bilingual, and in fact, mostly are in Indonesian, like 80%. And this is our mission, is to educate, empower, and push for a more equal society through constructive and solution-driven journalism. So we believe that journalism has a bigger role other than just reporting on what is happening, but also to provide context, to kind of engage and start a democratic conversation, and to to see and to provide or offer solutions. We cover kind of the wide spectrum of womanhood. And we like to give visibility to issues that are often seen as taboo, or not, not really covered by the media, not seen as important. We raise awareness on issues uncovered in other media, or give different perspective to it. We ensure there are nuances in our coverage. We give commentaries to news of the day through a gender and intersectional feminist lens. And we also provide a platform for different stories and perspectives from our our audience to be heard, because we believe that stories are empowering. And the issues that so this is on the left side is our website, and on the right side is our microsite, which is Women Lead. And some of the issues that are big among our readers are gender relationship, religion, and the oppression caused by the intersection of patriarchal norms and an increasing religious conservative society. And LGBT issue is also big because I think when we started, there was not that many. In fact, we were probably one of the first media that actually cover LGBT issues, try to be comprehensive at least. Recently, these are some of the issues that we did, like some of the big projects that we did. We recently launched our data journalism project, a news game on young marriage, where we capture real stories of women who get married young for whatever reason, so 18 to 24, whether they are forced to get married or because of unplanned pregnancy or other things. And we look at how that impact their lives, because in the past decade, there has been a lot of push for women to get married young. I think it's part of the increasingly conservative society that sees that dating can cause people to commit sins. At the same time, also we see that the influence of social media glorifying weddings and marriages and stuff is also pushing or influencing people to kind of think of marriage as their way of their destination or their purpose in life. So we did this, and we turned these interviews into news games, so in an interactive game, so people can play it and they see how that impact this women's life. A couple of weeks ago, we also did a survey on 15 to 19 years old on their thoughts and their perspective on sexual education, which we believe is a really important issue that is not being addressed enough, much less prioritized in Indonesia. And Mbak Marsha was also semi-involved in this project. So we're really thankful for that. This project will only be released next week. But aside from these big issues, we also see the importance in addressing pop culture, because with the shift of people's reading behavior, their interests, and also the easy access to digital content, pop culture is a really big influence in people's lives. We see the dominance of pop culture products, particularly those coming from Korea, or Japan. So we have our own kind of Korean wave rubric where we covers K-pop music and K-dramas and films through a gendered lens. So social media is where we, we're also very active in social media, in particular Instagram, where we do a lot of our content in a messaging that is different from our main site. Here we do a lot of explainer content and shareable reel videos. This is also where a lot of conversation is happening and where we would learn from our readers and use their feedback and the conversation as a reflection in doing our work. So one of the campaigns that we do is called #WTF Media, where we call out media's poor representation of women and gender minorities, which drives a lot of conversation. And in the beginning, we only, just kind of screen cap the article or the headline and show and post them, and in the caption we will show what is wrong with this. We will tell readers what is wrong with this. Now, in the spirit of being constructive, we actually modify, or we edit it out, and then we present it on our social media. And we're actually happy to see that this approach has been taken up by key opinion leaders and digital communities in the feminist space in Indonesia. I'm starting to see them doing similar things. I don't know, I mean, not necessarily because of us, but I think I'm really happy that this is becoming an awareness that the media has a lot of role in shifting kind of gender norms, because the whole purpose is to make people more critical of the media. And of course, we're not alone in this space, thankfully. We engage a lot with communities in our campaign. We support a lot of communities with aligned missions or values, whether or not they're feminist communities, through our social media and our site. We also work with commercial and non-commercial partners. Since last year, we worked with the Body Shop, for example, in Indonesia, to campaign against sexual violence through a range of activities. And one of them was to provide creative skills training for university students and a competition for them to create content, whether it's video, podcasts, or writing articles or essays on sexual violence. And a couple of months ago, we also worked with Komnas Perempuan, which who we work with a lot. It's the National Commission Against Violence Against Women on the gender aspect of death penalty. And I'd also like to highlight this fact that we are very happy to see how much this feminist space has grown since we first started. Since our establishment in 2013, and as social media becoming a lot more a big part of most people's life, we've also seen a growing number of feminist movement in the digital space. There is Conde, for example, which is another feminist media outfit. There is, of course, Jakarta Feminist, which Anindya is one of the co-founders. I don't know, co-founders or maybe one of the movers of that. And then there is, if you just look into Instagram and just search this, the word feminist in Indonesia, and you'll find like so many accounts, whether they were, run by a person or collectively, whether they're linked to schools, campus, or just a community, or just a digital space, digital community. I think it's really heartening. It's good. Some of them are, bringing a certain aspect like Muslim feminists, or they might be geographically, a more focused like Jogja feminists, or there is also a feminist group of people with different abilities. So it is a movement that continues to grow because, we know that there's a lot of work to be done to smash patriarchy in Indonesia. And hopefully this wonderful work can be taken into the offline world as well, offline space, to create more powerful impact so that we can bring gender equality in Indonesia. So I think I can end here now, Ibu Eva, and I'll be happy to answer some questions later.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Thanks so much, Ibu Devi. Oh, that's excellent in terms of timing. So, thank you so much, Ibu Devi, and all the panelists for sharing your expertise and knowledge. What remarkable presentations. I'm sure many of you have lots of questions. I could see from the chat box. And let's start with 4 questions, and we'll let the panelists answer the questions later. We'll just collect all the questions. Let me begin perhaps by asking 2 questions to Diana and Ibu Devi and Mbak Vivi. And I could see some questions for Ibu Masha and also Ibu Dani, and others, please raise your hands too. And let me start with Diana. Diana, could you please explain with a bit more details if women move to the informal sector when they get married and have children in your transitions analysis? And to Ibu Devi and Mbak Vivi, perhaps, both of you could answer this one. Could you please talk more about gendered digital activism? We understand that mainstream media and online media are gendered, how the mainstream media represent media, as you mentioned, Ibu Devi, before. Men are the cultural standard, men and women are portrayed in stereotypical ways that reflect and sustain socially endorsed view of gender. So could you please elaborate more how different are the two, mainstream media and online media, in terms of how they represent women? And the internet and social media, of course, has enabled women to present themselves. And how do you see this in terms of gender digital activisms? So those are my 2 questions. And let's move on to, do we have participants here raising hands, or should we just, okay, while waiting for the hand from the participants, let me just see the chat box. Okay, we have question from Jamal Sharif. Jamal, would you like to ask your question directly, Jamal?
Oke. Halo, dengan bahasa Indonesia aja ya.
Oh ya, silakan Pak Jamal.
Kenapa saya bertanya ini? Pertanyaan saya, pemahaman saya tentang gender itu kan antara laki-laki dan perempuan, hak-hak laki-laki dan perempuan. Nah, sehingga saya bertanya seberapa ada ruang untuk kesetaraan laki-laki dalam hubungannya dalam relasi gender di Indonesia. Nah, Saya bertanya ini begini berdasarkan data yang baru saja juga saya baca di Pengadilan Tinggi Agama Banjarmasin, sekitar 1.500 lebih terjadi gugatan cerai tahun 2019 dan 2020 ini. Dan Kepala Pengadilan Negerinya, Pengadilan Agamanya mengatakan bahwa mayoritas alasannya itu karena suaminya tidak bekerja gara-gara PHK karena pandemi ini. Nah, saya melihat dari isu itu seolah-olah laki-laki harus dipersalahkan gitu loh. Laki-laki dipersalahkan gara-gara dia tidak bekerja hanya karena pandemi, sehingga banyak sekali gugatan cerai yang dilayangkan oleh wanita. Berdasarkan kasus itulah saya bertanya ini tadi. Saya bertanya seperti itu tadi. Karena rata-rata webinar gender dan lain-lain lebih memblow up bahwa wanitalah yang jadi korban. Seolah-olah mohon maaf jika dikatakan begitu. Jika pemahaman saya salah. Padahal laki-laki dalam hal ini, dalam kasus tadi, ada kemungkinan laki-laki jadi korban. Karena konstruk masyarakat, laki-lakilah yang harus membiayai hidup rumah tangga. Saya mohon informasinya tidak hanya berdasarkan pada kasus tadi, tapi juga bahwa laki-laki justru dianggap sebagai manusia yang kuat, padahal sebenarnya laki-laki lemah. Saya rasa itu. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Thank you, Pak Jamal. So this question is for everyone actually, right? Anyone can answer this one. And then we have also another question from Kate. Kate, are you here still, Kate? I'm just trying to see Kate. And I have, we should mention here on behalf of ANU Indonesia Institute, we thank Kate for helping us designing this very wonderful program for today. So that's Kate's creation. Oh, is Kate here? Let me see. Oh, she's not here. Okay, right. Now let's move on to one more question, and from Ibu Smita Noto Susanto. Ibu Smita, would you like to just, okay, would you like to post your question directly, Ibu Smita? Ibu Smita, are you with us? I could see her, but perhaps there's problem with her internet connection. Why don't we move on to a question from, I think we have a question from, let me see, sorry, I'm just trying to look now. Asma Nabila? Oh, sorry, we have also a question for, from, let me see, yeah, Asma Nabila. Start with Asma Nabila first. Asma Nabila, are you here? Right. Okay. Asma Nabila is not here. Eliza, would you like to? I think you have also a question, right? Sorry, Eliza.
I do also have a question,
yeah.
But I think it's very similar to the former question, which was very much about looking at the definition of gender-based violence. I was just noting in fantastic presentations, by the way, for everyone. I was just noting in Vivi's presentation talking about the results of the survey that there was a propensity to represent victims of gender violence as women. However, I did see in the survey there were 19% of the perpetrators were wives. Wondering if there can be a little bit more comment, as I said, similar to the previous question about position of men as victims with gender-based violence.
Thank you, Eliza. So, panelists, please, who would like to start first? Ibu Dani, Ibu Devi, Diana?
I could answer your question if you want,
yes,
and then
Diana,
I will pass to the others to
Wonderful.
answer about the. I'm going to share my screen super quick, because I have a something that I could show. So basically, so the question is like, what's happening with this plot that women are going out of the formal sector employment? So I didn't present this, but I had it at the end of my presentation, which is like here, this first graph on the right, on the left, what it's showing is like the purple section is the proportion of women who were working in the formal sector. And what we see is that what we thought is that most of them would go to the self-employed, which is this blue here. But we observe is that they are not going to be self-employed to have more flexible time, so then they can juggle the household responsibilities and work. But instead, what is happening is that they are leaving the labor market, so they are going into not working, which is even more worrisome, because once women leave, or once someone, not only the women, once a person leaves the labor market, it's hard to come back. And in the second panel, what we see is still an exodus from the purple area, which is the formal sector, again to the non-working status. So they leave once they get married, and they also leave once they have the first child. And it's just very later on that some of them will come back, but most of it, as you can see here, almost 50% in the third panel would stay out of the labor market. So that's all I could just say.
Excellent. Thank you, Diana. Okay, next one, Ibu Devi, Bu Marsha.
I can try to answer your question first. So when we talk about gender digital activism, I think, this is one of the characteristics of fourth wave feminism globally, which is the use of social media, which enables them to extend their reach and mobilize support, and even affect things like calling out things and enabling them to, for example, in a Me Too movement, which impact the whole event. Some people who actually are perpetrators of sexual violence can actually be, who's been around with impunity for this whole time. And finally, because of, digital movement, there is hope for justice. And that happens in Indonesia as well, because like Vivi has already presented in the way of, Indonesia's legal system is so, I would say, incapable of giving justice to victims, because there's no perspective of victims, there's no gender perspective, and the law even is still very much lacking. So that's why we need a new law on sexual violence. But so a lot of people find that they are unable to, or they are reluctant to report, and whether it's reporting to the law enforcer or even to just come out, because there's also the stigma is also another thing. So what they do is they go into to social media, and so a lot of people now come out about their assault or about the violence that they experience on social media, and it being, and then there's the digital feminist space that I was talking about earlier can amplify that, and sometimes it leads to something. Maybe the person would get fired from work, or one way or another, their reputation is impacted. But there's also another side of that, which is because of our law on internet transaction, or our digital information law is really kind of rubbery, and it's been used to persecute people, who actually are victims. So there's been a few cases like that. But all in all, this gender digital activism, I think, has enabled a lot of women and also gender minorities to express themselves in a way that they couldn't before. It's enabled them to build network, to find like-minded people, to even curate content and and repackage that content to fit their needs or their communities, and it takes them to a lot of places. So I think it's very important. And the other thing also, when we're talking about the mainstream media as well, there is, I would say, since I started giving gender media training a few years ago from now, there is very little change happening. There may be one or two media outfits that have now started to adopt some gender sensitivity, but it's not there yet. There's still a lot of lacking. But meanwhile, their newsroom is actually filled with women. So there's feminization in newsroom as well. And so a lot of these women are also feeling dissatisfied with the way the editorial policy are being handled, because a lot of the leadership are still men. And in one case, I would just like to highlight one of the examples. A few years ago in our WTF media campaign, we posted this article, which was really sexist, capturing a badminton player, and the headline is actually focusing on the breasts or the nipples of that badminton player, which is really, really sexist and even very icky. So we posted that, and a lot of people call out. A lot of our readers were tagging the media. And so that led to the female reporters in that newsroom actually coming to their editors, and they were like, this is not the first time this reporter or this editor that done this, creating really sexist headlines and things like that. So that led to the person being demoted, actually. So I think, what's happening in social media can lead to something, can impact how, hopefully, how the media, will present or represent gender or women in their work. So I think that's that's pretty much how I see the importance of gender digital activism.
Thank you so much, Bu Devi. That badminton player reminds me of Farah and Abdul Hadi, the gymnast from Malaysia, with the media and also conservative people pointing at that. Oh, that's very revealing. That leotard is too revealing. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Ibu Devi. Mbak Vivi, would you like to add something from
Yes.
Ibu Devi?
Thank you so much, Mbak Eva, and thank you so much, Mbak Devi, for, I think, explaining it very clear in terms of digital activism. One of the things that Jakarta Feminist is mostly known for is actually a lot of people associated us with activists who actually take up space only on online settings. In terms of, a lot of people say that we are clicktivists or activists, online activists, despite that we do such a broad work that we do outside of online activism. But I think a lot of people most of the time kind of diminish the work of people who are actually trying to take up the space in online settings. When we're talking about gender-based violence, again, we're not only talking about women and men. We talk broadly about a very diverse of gender identity itself, including trans people, non-binary, those who are within those who are in the LGBTIQ communities. And I think when we're talking about digital activism, a lot of people, especially those who are part of the marginalized communities, such as LGBTIQ community, who do not have a safe space to be able to talk about their oppressions, their discriminations in offline settings, including women as well. A lot of us are actually resorted to online space. But I think one of the things that Devi already mentions is the fact that when we're talking about online space, there is online environment that in Indonesia, there's a lot of environment that actually create more vulnerability towards women and also LGBTIQ, people who are part of the LGBTIQ community or other marginalized group. And I think it's also very in line that today we're talking about digital activism, and today is actually the day when we are actually celebrating the International Days of Human Rights Defender, when women as human rights defender actually exposed to have more vulnerability in terms of being attacked online. I think one of the things that we discussed during our meeting as well is when Devi mentioned that she's tried to avoid using Twitter. And I think that's also one of the things that we face as a woman human rights defender on online space, where I know that men, as in terms of human rights defenders in general, also face a lot of vulnerability in terms of, a threat, violence in terms of attack and all of that online threat. But I think one of the things that we see when it comes to women and LGBTIQ human rights defender, we see there is a pattern when the threat or the harassment or the violence is very gender biased, and in terms of it escalated into sexual violence. And this is one of the things that we in Jakarta Feminist also receive a lot of, even me personally, I think we see that there is a lot of conversations in terms of Permendikbud 30 in 2021, when there is a lot of feminist activists were in support of that Permendikbud, and the attack that they receive is definitely very sexual. So these are the things that we also see is increasing right now. And I think there is a revisions of Undang-Undang ITE right now that is being discussed, or I'm not sure whether it's actually, or probably it's actually legalized right now, that anyone who actually quote-unquote menimbulkan keresahan masyarakat, I don't know, like a civil unrest, even in online settings, is right now is being vulnerable to criminalization, which means that it actually limits how we activists, human rights activists or human rights defenders are able to actually take up space online. However, I think we actually, Jakarta Feminist, just had our feminist festival 2 weeks ago that actually talking about feminist internet, which also dive deeper in terms of how we can create a feminist, like an internet that is more gender, more accessible, more gender sensitive, and all of that. And I think the challenge is definitely not a small challenge, but also this is something that we talk about as well, that we are starting to imagining how internet can be a feminist space, which is safe for everyone, and because we consider internet as an online space. And I think it is important for us to also be present online. And I think this is one of the conversations that people, like I mentioned, like to diminish activists that works on online space. But we do need to take the narrative. We need to take up the space to have a narrative of gender equality in online settings, because if not, that's the narrative is only going to be filled with people who are just not in favor of gender equality, right? But I think going towards the other questions, if I just answer it now from Eliza and also Jamal earlier about, how we see gender-based violence that is actually being experienced by men. And I completely agree with the fact that when we're talking about gender-based violence, and this is also one of the things why we prefer to use the terminology of gender-based violence in terms of violence against women, because we understand that gender is not just women and men. It's actually beyond that. And I think there is, when we talk about gender-based violence, it means there is a lot of gender biases that become the source of the problem. In terms of that, there is the gender bias is not only affecting women, but also affecting other gender, because it comes from like a society expectation of what men should do, what women should do, and all of that. And I think what Jamal and also Eliza mentioned earlier about, like the men as the victims of gender-based violence, yes, they exist. In a sense that our survey that I just mentioned, one of the things that I think is also answering, there's a questions about gaps of knowledge and information as well. And I think this is also kind of answer that when there is a lot of men who are still are afraid to talk about the experience of gender-based violence that they face because of the stigma and also the stereotype that men has to be strong, that men should be able to fight back and all of that. And I think because of that as well, the conversations towards it, it's definitely, it's very muted in a sense that if men speak up, that there's definitely a lot of people were saying that there's no way that this could happen to men. And I think there's also a lot of that is also came from people normalize gender-based violence only happen to women. That's why when it happens to men, a lot of people don't believe that it actually can happen to men. But in our survey, unfortunately, this is also the gaps of the information that probably can also vouch for the gaps as well, is that the number of men who actually fill in the survey is very, very small. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we do not have a lot of information in terms of sexual violence that is happening to men. And I think with what Jamal asked earlier in terms of the financial situation, it actually portrayed really well in our survey that it mentions that 81% of the respondents mentioned that there is definitely a shift of financial situations in their family, in their household during the COVID-19. But I think the reasons...
Sorry, but Vivi, could you please, make it a bit shorter?
Yeah. Sure. Just a last thing that I just wanted to say, but I think beyond the reasons of the financial situation that led to divorce, we also have to take a look deeper what actually entails to that situation, because most of the time the domestic burden actually lies upon women. So when men, because there is like this very stereotypical role when men should provide, but then in reality, during COVID-19, the burden of domestic roles is definitely falls of increasing burdens, or there's like a not just double burden, but maybe triple or maybe 4 times higher burdens. And there is a lot of cases where women were basically then being forced to be responsible, not in terms of providing in terms of economy, but also to take care on the domestic settings itself. That's why it leads to, like in a sense, it's also violence towards, like economical violence towards women as well. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mbak Vivi. So I'm just a bit conscious of the time. So sorry, Ibu Marsha, would you like to add something? And Ibu Sri, there's also a very interesting question from Kate for Ibu Sri. I think Kate says here, how can women's movement more effectively engage female politicians to support women's rights issue, looking at RUU PKS as an example? So that's a very interesting question from Kate for Ibu Dani. So perhaps Ibu Marsha, would you like to say something about the increasing number of divorce initiated by women?
Saya membayangkan kalau event ini, diskusi ini juga dihadiri oleh para perempuan anggota dewan, akan sangat penting untuk mereka dengarkan apa yang disampaikan oleh ibu-ibu semua, karena isu-isu perempuan itu tidak dipahami secara baik oleh anggota parlemen perempuan. Harus saya katakan itu.
Okay, well, waiting for Ibu Dani, Ibu Marsha. I think you could. Oh, it's already 4 now. Ibu Marsha, we want to hear from you.
I think I'm just quick. Vivi has. I hope Vivi has responded to all of the Jamal inquiry that gender is social constructions, and men and women also actually, even though men have more benefits at the moment because of this gender social construction or norms, but actually it affects also negatively to men. For example, if we look gender disaggregated data on lung cancer as well as traffic accident, we see how men is dominating because they are expected to have more public roles than women who are domestic. Who are expected to be domestic. So, but I just want to respond to Erna Dinata questions on chat box. So the disharmony between the health law and also with the child law is the child law defined that child started from 0 days, which is still in the woman's body, uterus, and while at the same time, health law defined that safe abortion is allowed. In certain conditions. So this kind of 2 laws that disharmonize actually creating a lot of discourse that whose rights should be put first, because these 2 laws has emphasized that even fetus has a right as a children. Well, actually international conference said that child started when they are born, not before they are born. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Ibu Marsha. So I'm very sorry. We're running a bit of time. It's already now 4:01. I'm sure we are happy to continue, but we don't want to keep our speakers too long. Thank you so much for the 5 panelists, Dr. Dani, Dr. Marsha, Mbak Vivi, Dr. Diana, Ibu Devi, for your wonderful insights. Please join me in thanking them for their fantastic and important work, scholarship, activism, and contribution to women's rights and gender equality in Indonesia. And thank you again, Kat Walton, for helping us design this fantastic program for today. Thank you, ANU Indonesia Institute, Professor Ed Aspinall, Dr. Ellie, and thank you, CAP Partnership, ANU, Liv, and Yanduang. Lastly, I should mention here, please stay connected. We look forward to engaging with you all in the future. To learn more about the ANU Institute, please visit our website as mentioned in the chat box text. And thank you again very much for joining us all. Stay safe, stay well and safe. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to our brilliant interpreters. Amazing
yes.
job.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much, Ibu Zamira. Thank you, Mia. Brilliant work. Thanks so much.
And thank you to you, Eva, for chairing it so well.
And thank you to you.